Welcome to the GLF Africa Digital Conference session on biochar and its practical application to restore degraded lands. I first would like to introduce you to today's speakers. We have Mrs. Mary Nyenga, Dr. Mary Nyenga, research scientist at World Agroforestry. Maybe wave your hand. Second speaker will be Elengo Odam, Executive Director of Odam, an Indian-based NGO on community development. We have Professor Thomas Ketterer, specialist on ecosystem ecology at the Swedish University of Agricultural Science. Professor Bruno Glaser, a specialist on soil biochemistry at the Martin-Luther-Universität Halle-Wittenberg in Germany. Then we have Mr. Dr. Roberg, a researcher at the International Institute for Tropical Agriculture, and Professor Cecilia Sundberg, specialist in bioenergy systems at the Swedish University of Agricultural Science. A warm welcome to all the speakers and warm welcome to all the participants. I would like to address some short meeting rules that guide us through the session. My name is Alexis Brakan. I'm advisor to the GIZ sectoral project on soil protection, and I will facilitate the moderation. We have a very tight time planning with only 8 minutes after every 2 presentations for question and answer sessions. Please address your questions during the presentation in the Q&A section as indicated here on the slide you see. If your question is already there or similar, please rank it. We will pick the most relevant questions from the Q&A box and bring them to the speakers. Questions that we cannot answer due to time issues will be answered later in the booth. You might see a link in the chat. You can follow to see also where we put up the presentations as documentation. Today's agenda will be in 3 parts. First, we address biochar production. Then we address the topic management of biochar and soils. And the third slot will be on the role of biochar in the broader context of dryland restoration and climate change. First, I would like to invite Juliane Wiesenhütter, head of the GIZ sectoral project on soil protection, for a welcome note for an introduction.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alexis. Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, welcome to this session on behalf of GIZ and our partners. The Global Landscapes Forum is about drylands in Africa, very important as drylands cover a substantial part of surface and host millions of people, especially in Africa. Drylands are sensitive ecosystems. Unfortunately, a substantial part is already degraded. But healthy land is important for development, peace, and security. Everybody is depending on functioning ecosystems and their services, and most of Africa's people even directly, as they live from agriculture and healthy soils. The unique selling point of our project, the sector project on soils, hosting today's event, is the United Nations Convention to Combat Gasification, UNCCD, and German contributions to its processes in the international arena for sustainable land management. We support the German focal point to UNCCD by hosting and facilitating a number of UNCCD-related matters, initiatives, and networks. We contribute to data standards and availability, awareness on soils and sustainable land management, know-how, and solutions for achieving land degradation neutrality. Land and land use are victims of climate change and at the same time large contributors to climate change. Increasing temperatures and irregular rainfalls affect ecosystems and their services. Like extended drought periods can change the land use and accelerate land degradation. Loss of soil organic matter due to degradation contribute to a loss of carbon and cause climate change. So there's no doubt that there is a link between land use and climate change. Against this background, our project took action to promote the interlinkages as well as solutions to tackle multiple challenges. One field of action is to pilot biochar as soil amendment and long-term carbon storage. We want to generate evidence by improving soil fertility and food security and reversing land degradation. Why does biochar have the ability to improve soil properties, in particular for highly weathered, nutrition poor or acid soil under dryland conditions? Can biochar be a low-cost option suitable for low-income households or communities? The 6 speakers of this session will guide us through the production of biochar, the effects of biochar on soils and crops, will explain us, hopefully, how it can fit into the daily life of rural communities, and finally, how it contributes to climate change, mitigation, and adaptation. So I'm very grateful for the speakers and the wonderful organization of the whole event by GLF and GLF team. We welcome you once again, and we hope that this event is an opportunity for us all to know more about biochar as an option and solution to maintain and restore healthy land. Thank you. Up to Alexis.
Thank you very much, Juliane, for setting the scene. Let's directly dive into the presentations of our speakers. The first slot is on biochar production, and we will hear Mrs. Dr. Mary Nyenga on reducing pressures on woodlands by using gasifier stoves in households with a gender perspective, as well as followed by a presentation on production of biochar soil amendments from agricultural and municipal wastes and Prosopis uliflora in India by Elango Oda. By Mr. Elango. Please start the presentation, Naomi, and let's continue with Mrs. Nyenga.
Hello, everybody. I want to take you through a talk on bioenergy, biochar systems in small-scale farms in Kenya. This presentation has been put together by several authors, and I thank all of them. Let me start off by briefly describing the bioenergy system in Kenya, which is an example of what's happening in sub-Saharan Africa. In Kenya, charcoal and firewood are the main sources of cooking and heating energy. Charcoal is produced mostly in the drylands, and wood is buried under soil and burns under controlled oxygen, and the charcoal then is traded and used for cooking. The same system, the charcoal production using those kind of traditional kilns results into dust that is being harvested for biochar production for biochar use. And in terms of firewood, it's mainly used in rural areas and sourced by mostly women and children from forests and used in open fire. In areas where agroforestry adoption is high, we are finding that about 40% of the households are self-reliant in terms of firewood supply. Let me give you an example of the bioenergy, biochar system linkages and Nexus. We have been implementing a project with 150 farmers in the highlands, the coast region, and medium lowlands. These farmers are using a top-lit updraft gasifier, which is reproduced or fabricated locally by Kenya Industrial Research and Development Institute. And the way the gasifier works is that when farmers are using the firewood, it burns at a controlled oxygen. And when the flame goes off, then they harvest the biochar and use it for soil amendment. This cooking system is reducing fuel consumption significantly and also reducing emissions and co-producing biochar for soil amendment. In one cooking, farmers produce about 200 grams of biochar per cooking, and they have been applying it at the rates of 1 to 10 tons per hectare. And we have seen significant increase in yield. And this will be talked more in the latter session. And once we studied this in real life, in the kitchen laboratories on its performance, we also had a longitudinal study to try and understand what is the perceptions of the users in its functionality. And these are mostly women. And what we are finding is that they say some things are easy to work with, it's easy to write, it saves fuel, reduces emissions, but they are also facing certain challenges. One of the challenges is like chopping wood into small pieces of about 22 centimeter, which they are saying is adding labor to women. The other thing is that if they are cooking food that cooks for a long time, like more than 50 minutes when wood carbonizes into charcoal, then they have to change over, they have to rewrite the stove. And these challenges, what they are saying, what this is telling us is that we have to take these women's perceptions seriously because they either enhance adoption or there is low adoption. And we are giving this feedback to Kenya Industrial Research Institute, and we are also designing further studies to be able to address these challenges. For example, what kind of a gadget can go for chopping wood when it's wet and then it's stored for cooking for the whole period. So looking at this system, it improves livelihoods, reduces women's workload in fuel collecting firewood, but it also reduces pressure on the dry lands and also on the forests for sourcing fuel. Next. This research has been beneficial and it's contributing to development in Kenya. One of the ways that it has contributed is in the development of the bioenergy strategy. I sat in the working group of the bioenergy strategy development, and the recommendations coming out of the work and in this strategy is that there is need for sustainable production of biomass energy for both energy and for biochar. There is also need to improve on the conversion technologies or the pyrolysis of converting wood into charcoal or biochar. And then there is need for cleaner biomass cooking technologies that produce heat for cooking and biochar for solar amendment. The same research is also contributing, has contributed to the development of the Eastern Africa regional economy strategy, which is talking about improving livelihoods, environment, food security. Looking at the bioenergy biochar system, it's contributing to the Kenya's Big Four agenda, in that it enhances food security, increasing use, but also people having accessible ways of cooking the food they want, reduces indoor air pollution, health issue, and it's a manufacturing issue, creating jobs in terms of kilns development, stoves, and instruments for sizing wood. And it's also a housing issue where these cleaner systems also need to be in cleaner kitchens with good ventilation. And in that, so the take-home message is that these bioenergy, biochar systems are contributing to livelihood, environment, and mitigating climate change. And in the next slide, there is further reading that people can access. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Ms. Niega. Let's directly jump to the next presentation. After this, we will have a slot for question and answers. Please keep on addressing your questions in the chat. We will collect them. I would like to invite Mr. Lango on the topic of protection of biochar soil amendments from agriculture and municipal waste, and Prosopis uliflora in India. Please go ahead.
Hello. Good afternoon to all. I'm Ilango from India, representing the NGO Vodam. Next slide, please. Initially, I'd like to share about the importance of selection of feedstock for biochar. Any biomass can be utilized as a feedstock, which is available in our area, which is abundant, which is exotic, which may be weed. Our existing trials with the feedstocks are especially Prosopis juliflora, which is abundantly available in our area. The next one, municipal waste, especially organic waste. Agricultural waste like sugarcane trash, cotton stacks, seed pods of groundnut, etc. Next. In early 50s, Prosopis juliflora introduced for fuel need in Tamil Nadu state in India, but it invading the cultivable fertile lands during the continuous drought. Deep-rooted, it is very deep-rooted and would not be removed manually. Fertile agricultural lands are affected by its spread. Small farmers and landless agricultural laborers were worstly affected due to these above combined natural and anthropogenic activities. They severely impacted on long-term livelihood activities and strategies of the people in this region. Next. Here you can see the heap size kiln, traditional mud kilns. In 2009, we come to aware that terra preta, meaning blotch, earth in Portuguese, and its application to the farming activities would be a better option for enhancing the fertility of nutrient-poor soil by increasing the soil carbon. Next. Here the photograph shows the traditional charcoal making, especially for Prosopis juliflora. The first photograph is stacking of Prosopis woodlards. Second one is the structure of traditional kiln. The last one is the grading of produced charcoal, just like removing the dusts and soil and other things, collecting the good charcoal. Here you can see the photographs of first one is Jatropha's seed pod, seed cover. The second one is cone and dust of bajra millet. And the third one is sugarcane trash, the waste. These are the agriculture waste we tested, experimented for biochar to convert into biochar. Next. This is a very simple technology. Most of the people know the oil drum or tar drum kiln. Pyrolysis of agriculture waste. The first one is oil drum kiln with PVC pipe packed with agriculture waste tightly. The second one is the kiln covered with iron plate. The third one, top of the kiln covered fully with sand to prevent carbon entry. That is the controlled flow of oxygen. That is pyrolysis process. Next one. Here we can see the biochar from the agriculture waste. It's mostly soft in nature, so to convert into powder, there is no need for machinery. Even we can crush the agri-waste charcoal, even by hand, we can make it into powdered form. The challenges, the traditional mud kiln method. Here I used to say about the feedstock of Prosopis juliflora, which is abundantly available in the south of Tamil Nadu and some other parts of India, and also mostly in selected countries in Africa also, Prosopis juliflora. So in the traditional mud kiln method, around 10% of unburnt woodlots will be there by the end of the process. The second one, it needs the charcoal produced from Prosopis juliflora, which is hard one. So it needs pulverizer to crush the biochar to powder form for effective application in the soil. Effective application here I mean is when we apply in the powder form in the soil, the vegetable crops or any other things, especially vegetable crops, we can see the difference within 20 days with the other plants and the biochar applied one. In the third one is in the tar drum method of converting agri-waste to biochar, only small scale level of biochar can be produced. So when we go for scaling up, the existing tar drum method will not work. So there is a need for improved biochar kiln, which can increase the percentage of conversion rate, especially any feedstock to biochar in short duration with minimum manpower. Initially, application of raw charcoal powder in the soil caused mortality of seedlings. Later, the charcoal powder was, this is our experiences. Later, the charcoal powder was saturated with farmyard manure and de-oiled seed cakes of different oil seeds by adding water for the saturation. The mixture was stirred periodically before the application in the soil. Next. There are the trials for the beginners. In the early stage, the pits method will be easy for the beginners to get more clarity about the application of biochar. The pits of 2 into 2 into 1.5 feet dimension, that is width and depth. After digging the pits, topsoil was filled up to half the depth of the pit, and then the biochar soil amendments can be filled in up to 2 to 3 inches. Again, the topsoil can be filled, and then the vegetable seeds can be sown and watering. Next. Further, the saturated biochar soil amendments can be applied to various vegetable crops like onion, chili, kidney beans, and perennial crops like moringa, groundnut, and other fruit species such as sapota and amla. We have experimented, and also for in the floriculture area, we selected jasmine plants because which is largely cultivated in our area. So we tested with jasmine plants also. As a result, we can see the size of the flowers. Jasmine flowers are bigger than the existing regular one. After application of biochar soil amendments, as the species exhibited even growth, increased plant height, and the formation of more roots than the regular practice of vegetable cultivation with chemical fertilizer and farmyard manure. Next.
There's only half a minute left. Can you come to the conclusions, please?
Okay. When we are discussing with the farmers, when we asking about the difference between red and black soil, the black soil is the best one because it retaining the soil moisture in the topsoil. So we can apply biochar in the red soil, and it can work like a black soil. Next one. This is the biochar we applied in the bottom of the tree. You can see some small mushrooms. Next one. I think. Thank you. As a conclusion, application of biochar soil amendments will enrich the soil condition and also ensures the food security. Ultimately, it is a carbon negative technology. Finally, I like to say 273 kilograms of biochar in the soil represents the removal of 1 ton of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lango, for this very visual example of practical application. I've got some questions coming in from the audience. First, I would like to address a question to Mrs. Nyenga. There's a question: how can we bring the results of biochar trials into practice at farm level? What is your opinion on that?
To take this, for example, into scale, because we had trials with about 150 farmers. To take this into scale is that it's good to work with the local government extension arm at the different areas. And also it's good to partner with NGOs which are working on community development so that they can take it up as one of the solutions, cleaner solutions for biochar, for agriculture, and then they can build capacity of many households. And this is also something that can be summarized in a very short time in a video that can be shown through TV. There is a lot of households who watch TV, and this is a program that can go through that, through the local languages, radio systems, and all that. But yes, it requires an extensive partnerships to be able to get this to large numbers of farmers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe another question for you directly, Mrs. Nyongo. What is the feedstock for gasifiers? Which agricultural residues do you use, and what is the cost of this gasifiers at local level?
When we gave the gasifiers to the farmers, we advised them to use any fuel, any biomass fuel that they also use with open fire. But what we found is that they preferred to use firewood. So the fuel that has been used with the gasifier is firewood. And this firewood is sourced from the farms. 40% of the farmers were sourcing it from the farms. They were self-sufficient with firewood from the farms, so they get it from their farms through pruning trees. The trees that are grown for timber, for fruits, then they are pruned at the beginning of the year during the dry season, and they are dried, and then they are used in the gasifier. And so in terms of the other thing is the cost of the gasifier, yes, because the gasifier is mostly currently being produced by Kenya Industrial Research Institute. The price is about $50 per piece, and that's why we give all the farmers to see if they are given for free how they will use it. But for them to buy it, who wants, it's $50. But there are negotiations with Kildy that the researchers are having. How can the price go down? And what Kildy is saying is that they can produce the parts of the gasifier by getting the materials in large scale, and then the local energy centers that are run by the Ministry of Energy can work with the youth to assemble them locally. And this way, it will make it cheaper and accessible. Thank you.
So there are economies of scale being applied if scaled up. There is another question from the audience. Which policy needs to be changed at the national level to make maximum use of biochar? Maybe I would like to also invite Mr. Elango to give us his opinion on that question.
Yes. In India, Government of India has banned for making charcoal in the policy level, but the people are making charcoal out of Prosopis juliflora. The government policy insists. Government policy insists the deforestation to control those things. That's why they insist the thing. So there is a policy change in the Government of India to encourage the biochar, because there is no existing setup is there, policy is there. So there is a need in India, because there are thousands of people, farmers involved in making biochar in southern part of Tamil Nadu and also in Andhra Pradesh and Gujarat and some other parts in India. Thank you.
Let me address another question to you, Mr. Elango, from the audience. How often do we have to apply a biochar fertilizer? Each season or intervals? Is there information on different crops and soil patterns?
You mean the different results, the yield result in the cultivation, or?
Yes.
Yes, it differs. Not in general. For example, when we applied in chili, we come to know 35% more yield. When we applied in lady's finger, it is nearly more than 60% result. So it's based on the soil condition and the biochar, how much we are applying, and also the combination of biochar and other organic matters. Based on that, it will work. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We have only a limited time available, so I would like to go to the next slot on management of biochar amended soils. All questions unanswered as for now will be answered after the session. I would like to invite Mr. Professor Thomas Ketterer, specialist on ecosystem ecology at the Swedish University of Agricultural Science, to present the topic biochar and its practical application to restore degraded lands, to share with us the experiences from field experiments in Kenya, followed by Professor Bruno Glaser, a specialist on soil biochemistry at the Martin Luther University Halle-Wittenberg in Germany, on the topic biochar state of the art. Please go ahead, Mr. Ketterer.
Thank you very much, Alexis, and hi everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to organize this and giving us the opportunity to present our work that we have done. This is a cooperation between the IITA C4 in Kenya and between two Swedish universities, KTH and SLU. Next, please. So we were studying during the last 15 years biochar effect on soil fertility in 3 regions in Kenya, in the west, in the central part, and at the coast. And our main questions to study were how do crop yields respond to different doses of biochar, and how persistent are yield responses over time? How do different feedstocks affect yield responses? So these were the main questions. And we addressed this by setting up 3 different experiments. The first one started in 2006. It's a long-term trial, which is still ongoing. And then we have at 9 sites, we have short-term trials doing 3 to 4 seasons. And we have also participatory trials, which already Mariam Bianca mentioned before, together with 150 farms. Next slide, please. So first to the long-term trial, started in 2006. It's a maize and soybean rotation. So during 1 year, both maize and soybeans are grown. The biochar application rate was quite high in this initial experiment, 100 tons per hectare, mainly Acacian wood at 3 sites and 20 growing seasons. Next slide, please. Here you see the yield responses of maize and soybean in 4 different treatments. So we have a fertilized and an unfertilized control, and both plus the 100 of tons of biochar. So 4 different treatments. And the main results were that the average yield response to biochar was 1.2 tons per hectare in maize and 0.4 tons per hectare in soybeans. And the average yield response to mineral fertilizer were 1.6 and 0.6 in the maize and soybean. And the yield increases due to fertilization and biochar, they were additive. So if you have the biochar plus the fertilizer, you get 1.2 plus 1.6 makes 2.8 tons. So there was no interaction between the biochar and the fertilizer in this trial. And the yield responses were persistent over time. So the one-time application caused yield responses during the whole 10-year period. Next slide, please. The second series of experiments, it was on-farm trials at 9 different farms in 3 regions. And we used 4 different rates of application, 0, 1, 5, and 10 tons per hectare of biochar, and both in the non-fertilized and the fertilized treatment. And you see here in the middle figure, in the colors, are the different seasons, 4 seasons in 2 regions, and 3 seasons in the western part, where they have only 1 crop per year. And so the higher the biochar application rate, the higher the yield. And you see on the right-hand side, across all sites and seasons, you see the biochar response or the yield response to the biochar rate. The higher the rate, the higher the yield response. And you get 4 tons more. We got 4 tons more of maize with the 10 tons of biochar application. But even at the small application rate of 1 ton, we got also a significant yield increase. And responses were consistent over sites and feedstocks. And the feedstocks that were used, it's coconut shells, maize stover, and coffee husk in the different regions, because these feedstocks were most available. Next, please. And then the third series of experiments, participatory trials together with 150 farmers. And we looked at maize. I show here the maize yield response to biochar rates. So in this farmer participatory trials, the farmer produced the biochar from crop residues or from firewood at the local scale in the farm with this gasifier stoves. And the different families produced a different amount of biochar. And we just monitored the 2 plots, a control plot and a biochar plot, where the farmers put as much biochar they could produce. And you see here the maize yield increases in response to the different rates of biochar. And it differs a little bit between the different regions, but the general trend is that we get huge responses of yield maize increase to biochar rates. Next, please. So the conclusions from these 3 different series of experiments: the biochar effect on yield was persistent over 20 seasons. The biochar effect was rather independent on the feedstock type, which suggests that the production conditions may be more important than the feedstock type for the yield response. Already small doses of biochar, like 1 ton per hectare, could double the yields. 10 tons of biochar plus NP fertilizer increased yields almost 10 times. So the control yields were below 1 ton at almost all farms. Effects of biochar and fertilizer were additive, so there are no interaction between those, and the mechanisms have to be studied further. I show here only the yield responses. We did some work on soils also, but further research is on the way. So the soil application of locally produced biochar is a promising concept for increasing food security on smallholder farms in Kenya. Next, please. So thank you for your attention. I would like to acknowledge the grant providers and our partners. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Katterer. I would like to invite Professor Glaser on his input on biochar state of the art before we go into a question and answer session. Please, to all of you, please make sure your camera is switched off if you're not talking and on if you are presenting. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for organizing this very important session. So I would like to see my first slide, please. I'm talking about, I will summarize the state of the art about biochar research and also application. So it's divided into several parts. Some of it has been addressed already, so I can go quickly through it. So I will start with talking briefly about biochar properties, and then I will enlarge the topic a little bit to biochar systems, show a few practical examples, and then in one slide I will summarize the scientific state of the art. And then finally I will also address a new issue, or an additional very important issue, which would be also important for Africa. It's a carbon negative technology which could help us to save the climate. And then I will summarize it. For a more detailed scientific summary, you see here links for my full scientific review, which is available at YouTube in German and in English. You can follow the links if you are more interested about the depth of science. Next slide, please. So what is biochar? It's actually charcoal, but its main purpose is improving soil properties. So we can, from a chemical point of view, differentiate between a physical and a chemical structure, which you can see here. And the physical structure has some porosity, which is good for soil, water, and air storage or aeration. Then from a chemical point of view, we have these condensed aromatic moieties, which gives biochar a black color and which is very stable. So it's good for carbon sequestration. We have also functional groups at the edges, which can adhere soil nutrients. So it's good for soil nutrition, but we have also some labile carbon enhancing microbial processes in the soil. And of course, we have more or less parts of ash during the production, which is the immediate fertilizer. I have to stress here already that biochar is not a fertilizer, so it should never be used alone. It's rather a soil ameliorator, which brings me to the next slide. So the best successful biochar system is the Amazonian dark earth or terra preta, which has been already mentioned. It was investigated by myself during my PhD thesis 20 years ago, And the key, of course, is biochar, which makes the soil dark, which enhances it in soil organic matter, and which makes it stable. But I have to stress here, and this is the reason why I'm talking about biochar systems, we need also to include nutrients, and we need also to include the soil microbiology, which is summarized here. Next slide, please. If we translate this old system to a modern biochar concept, rather than a soil or biochar systems, it is more closing nutrient cycles, which is also important in Africa. You can see here a modern system. So we have biomass residues, which we divide into nutrient-rich ones and nutrient-poor ones. And my suggestion is that only from the nutrient-poor ones, that means not manure, only woody stuff, we generate biochar through pyrolysis, for instance, but there are also other technologies available. And then together with the nutrient-rich residues, such as compost, digestate, manure, and also switch sludge, we compost it together, generating therapeutic analoga or biochar substrates, which you can use for ameliorating soil and higher biomass production. And as you can see here, it's a circular system, a bio-based circular system. Next slide, please. Another topic which I would like to address is the cascade use of biochar. That means if we intelligently introduce it into our circular economy, it can provide multiple benefits. So when we started using as a filter material, cleaning our residue water, it adheres substances we can feed our animals, and then bringing back the biochar enriched manure to the soil for soil management, for soil improvement, having higher crop production. And a part of these crop residues, which are increased now, are introduced into a kind of resource management, including energy production, and then coming back to the whole system. So this is cascade use. So use your biochar as many times as possible in the system. Next slide, please. Now I show you two practical examples which we made in Ethiopia. So cook stoves have been already introduced. My suggestion is to use cook stoves not only with fuel wood, but in Ethiopia we used it with coffee husks, which are available in huge amounts. And as has been already mentioned, you can save energy, you can produce cleaner air, and then as a byproduct, you get biochar. And this biochar, again here, should not be applied as such to soil, but should be enriched with other nutrient-rich farm residues to generate biochar compost substrates or therapeutic analoga, which could be sold for, on the one hand, and used at the own fields for improving soil properties and crop yields. And then, of course, again, here you have higher yields and so on. You come back to this idea of circular economy. Next slide, please. In Ethiopia, we have also looked for a larger scale system because there are also types of biomasses available, as has been shown also for India with prosopis. In Ethiopia, it's rose residues from flour production, which is very typical also in other Eastern African countries, such as Kenya. And those compost very hardly, so we can use those ideally for a larger scale technology such as Pyrex. Such technology is available as well. And of course, it's more sophisticated, but for this type of companies, it is also available. And then again, we get biochar out as a residue, which we could compost together with other residues, selling it or using it for these rose productions to increase the sustainability. And in addition, we should also use the energy out of the system. So for the small scale one, it was cooking. For the large scale one, we get process heat, which can also be used for cooling in an adsorption chiller, because these flowers need to be cooled before they are transported to Europe. Next slide, please.
Professor Gleiser, there's 1 minute left for conclusions.
Okay. So, I have two more field experiments done in Germany. These are the next two slides, corroborating what has been shown that biochar can increase the yields, the soil organic matter contents, and the water storage. Next slide, please. I won't go into detail. They are published as well. Next slide, please. What I want to do now for the rest of my time, I want to summarize the proper biochar results from scientific literature. You should know that there are in the meantime 10,000 publications out of it, with individual studies, 500 reviews and 50 meta-analysis, showing clear overall positive effects, about 10% yield increase, with trees even more carbon sequestration. We have less nitrous oxide emissions, we have less nitrate emissions, we have an increase in the plant P availability. We have a reduction in heavy metal uptake, soil density, and increase in soil water holding capacity as already shown. So there are many benefits out of it. Again, here we have the YouTube link with the full review, including the figures and so on. And again, I want to stress that scientific evidence is there, that biochar is a good thing. But again, I should stress here that biochar should never be applied alone, but always together with nutrient-rich residues in form of terra preta analoga to closing the nutrient cycles. Okay, so thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Excellent, thank you very much. There are already questions from the audience. I would like to read out loud. There's a question. Could you if I was a farmer in Africa, what would you recommend to me? How often should I apply biochar? In which quantities, frequency? Which fertilizer should I add?
I don't know to whom this question addresses.
Yes, maybe to Mr. Ketterer. There are more questions coming.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think the answer is very much local, what kind of local resources that are available. I mean, it's a high diversity of different small-scale farms in the different regions. And in some farms, there may be coffee husks. In the other farm, there may be rice straw, which don't have an alternative use for feeding cows and so on. So all kinds of resources that are available are dry and low in nutrients, as Bruno stressed, are good feedstocks for pyrolysis. And so and which kind of fertilizers, of course, I mean, to get a good yield, you have to supply also fertilizers in some way, organic or mineral.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Maybe a question to Mr. Glaser at this point. Very often biochar is advocated as mitigation technology. However, so far developing robust methodologies to accurately capture the mitigation benefits has been difficult. Did you evaluate the mitigation benefit of the approaches presented? And if yes, what were the results? Sorry, this question also goes to Mr. Ketter, I guess.
I think Cecilia Sundberg will go into that in one of the next presentations, the more system perspective and also including mitigation of climate change, greenhouse gases, and so on.
But I can also answer to it. There are a lot of, it's not true, this statement is not true, because there are a lot of studies meanwhile, and as I have shown at the beginning, the polycondensed aromatic structure of biochar can be quantified, so we have developed a method for it. And in the European biochar certificate, for instance, there is also a threshold, or there is a publication, and the sequestration duration of biochar is directly related to the H/C ratio of the material. So this is contrary to soil organic matter. I agree with you, it is very difficult because you don't know how long it stays in there. Biochar, once in the soil, and once you know the properties, the material properties, especially the H/C ratio or this part of this polycondensed aromatic moieties, you can be sure that it stays there for at least 100 years. And this is the criterion for this mitigation. And then you easily can quantify it. And you can offset it with your CO2 price. So this is quite easy. And it's already, by the way, it's implemented on a voluntary basis in Europe already. And this can easily be also adopted for Africa. And it's also, I think, a good idea to generate additional income, because if farmers do this and they improve their soils, why not also getting money from Europe, for instance, for this carbon mitigation? I think there will be a market for that immediately, and it can be immediately used if the material properties is analyzed. And also for these cook stoves, I think it's easy to find a medium H/C value for all the chars which you can now apply for the amount of carbon which is sequestered there.
I think the crucial question is if the feedstocks are sustainably produced or not. It's not only the properties of the char that makes it. I mean, okay, it stays for a long time, but in a more general perspective regarding climate change, if it is a driver for deforestation, the biochar will not be a good idea to produce a lot of biochar from deforestation, for example. So the sustainable production of feedstock is very crucial for that.
But this is no contradiction. This is no contradiction to what I have said. It's a general criterion for biochar in general. But I strongly disagree with this also, because I mean, if you look at deforestation in Africa, it's going on anyway because people just need the fuel. And if you look at these small cook stoves, and you can save fuel, let's say 50%. Why not using the technology, and why not getting the money for sequestering carbon? Of course, I mean, if you have no fuel, you can also think about burning this charcoal to have heat, which is probably necessary there. But this is not a question of sustainability, because these systems are not sustainable anyway now, at least not in Africa. And on the contrary, it's one argument. I would tell these farmers as one argument for increasing their sustainability in getting the money for sequestering carbon, probably from Europeans, contrary to burning either wood as they do it right now, or burning the biochar they are producing, and then using it for soil improvement instead. So it's a more sustainable system, independent what your feedstock is there, because you are using the feedstock anyway.
Dr. Nyenga, you raised your hand to contribute to the discussion.
Yes.
Your microphone is on mute.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I think what I want to contribute to in terms of the mitigation issues is that in Africa setup, when we look at biochar, it's mostly like charcoal. And there is the whole issue of the systems, the way they are being a bit inefficient. But it's true, there is a lot of effort looking at one, biomass has to be sustainably produced, short rotation forestry, using prunings, and secondly, carbonizing the biochar either in improved stocks or in very improved efficient kilns, and then using very efficient stocks. So looking at the whole system to mitigate. But Cecilia will talk about this and how we did it in the Gasifier cook stove. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nyenga. Mr. Ketterer, Professor Ketterer, Professor Glaser, if you allow, we would like to jump into the next session. Dr. Nyenga already mentioned that we will talk here about the role of biochar in context of dryland restoration and climate change, addressing also the question of mitigation. I would like to invite first Dr. Dries Robrug, a researcher at the International Institute for Tropical Agriculture based in Nairobi, with the topic forecasting the biophysical potential of carbon sequestration and co-benefits with biochar from crop residues, followed by Professor Sundberg, specialist in bioenergy systems at the Swedish University of Agricultural Science, with the topic climate impact of biochar on smallholder farms, a life cycle perspective. Please go ahead, Mr. Robrug.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you, GIZ, for organizing this session, bringing us all together around this gasification bonfire, let me say, and GLZ for hosting this session. Can I see my first slide? Yes. So in the next 8 minutes, I'll be running you through the results from a study that we carried out in collaboration with the University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences in Vienna and Makerere University in Uganda, funded by the Austrian Development Agency. Next slide, please. And this is instigated by the question that you keep getting after presenting results from the effects of biochar on and soil biochar amendment on crop production or the long-lasting and persistent carbon sequestration it brings. And from be it farmers, practitioners, or scientists, is okay, that's great, but where do you get the feedstock from sustainably, and how much is there available, and what is the potential at scale, basically in the field, but also at national scale? And that's why in a project in eastern Uganda, as shown here on the map, we did exactly that. And to be honest, I've been involved in a lot of research and a lot of field research. This was kind of straightforward, and you'll see that at the end of the presentation. To be aware, the site we worked in is a bimodal rainfall tropical system. So slightly, it's not a dryland area with 2 growing seasons, and therefore the potentials have to be also seen in that perspective. Next slide. In this, we have a quick overview of the methodologies, the approaches we used to quantify and forecast the biomass availability and its potential for carbon sequestration and other co-benefits. So the first step, to go out into the field with quadrants and just randomly throwing them in fields of maize, sorghum, millet, rice, and groundnut. And from there, we measured the yields. We measured both the grain yield, the residue yield, also the height and other phenotypic characteristics. Second was to, and this was done by a team, master's students from Makerere University. As you see on the picture, in the second step, they went out to survey households on the use of each specific residue fraction that we mapped. Third is then we compiled data on the conversion of residue to biochar based on published studies and reverse engineering tools. And last was then to use simple stochastic carbon decomposition models for modeling the accumulation of carbon in soils through biochar amendment from residues that are sourced on the same parcel of land. Next slide. And in these next slides, in this first one here, you see results from step 1 and 2 in these Sankey diagrams, as they are called. The flow on the left, you first have the measured yields of different biomass fractions. this is each time from around 20 fields. And on the right-hand side, if you then multiply that with the proportional use of these residues that we got from the survey, you get availabilities for biochar, say bioenergy and biochar systems. And on one season, basically in every season, from a maize crop, you get say 1 ton of biochar, which represents 0.7 ton of fixed carbon per hectare that you harvest. So with these results, next slide, please. Using these results, then in step 4, what you see here is actually on the bottom left is a simple presentation of the potential rates of biochar carbon inputs per year. So basically, if you have a cereal legume rotation, in this case maize and groundnut, or a monocrop rice paddy, you can actually per year add between 0.2 and 1.1 ton carbon per hectare per year. And for those in the session, I think many are aware of the 4 per mil target, which is the green line, and that's approximately 0.6 ton of carbon per hectare per year to offset all of the global emissions of carbon. Well, you see it is feasible under different scenarios of residue availability, shown on the right-hand graph in different envelope curves, different colors. Low meaning 20%, only 20% of a residue is used for other practices, and high is then only 80% is diverted to other uses. And what you see is that you can actually achieve and exceed the 4 per mil target at current small-scale farmer yield levels. To be clear, those are actually 2 times lower than the attainable levels. Next slide. I'm rushing through this a bit. Then further, we used the data we got from individual quadrants to go and test and validate whether we can use the grain yield, so the economic fraction, the currently economized fraction, to predict the residue yield, because there are, as you know, there are very stable harvest indexes, what is called in agronomy, and this result from cross-validation of measured and modeled residue yields is basically for each residue fraction from each of the 5 crops we studied. We have a very, very neat fit, and can be used to forecast the residue yield at a field level or a national level. Next slide, please. And that's exactly what we did in the last part of this study, is then actually based on the FAO reported national scale yields for the 5 crops. We calculated the residue that is produced alongside, and then under different scenarios of competitive use of those residues, we find that between 11 and 79% of the total CO2 emissions from Uganda, the annual CO2 footprint, can be offset with the residues of just those 5 crops. And next to that, we also, based on a very gross energy balance, we estimate that the firewood of 1 to 6 million people can be substituted by these crop residues through the use of gasifier systems. Next slide, as I'm wrapping up. So this is a link to the published paper with these results and further more detailed description. And next slide, I recommend everyone, and click again, I think, on the slide. Yeah, I recommend everyone to also, next to a scientific publication, to get in touch with popular science magazines like The Conversation, who were very helpful in translating the paper into a more, say, easy and say something for people to read over a coffee break, and it got a lot of attention. Thank you,
very much
for yours, and glad to respond to your question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rohrbach. Let's wait for more questions coming in, as I would like to call up Professor Sundberg on the topic of climate impact of biochar on smallholder farms, a life cycle perspective.
Thank you. Yes, we already heard the beginning of a discussion here about climate impacts of biochar and how it actually can contribute to climate change mitigation. And here I will show results from a case study, and it's the same case that Mary Jenga, Thomas Ketterer talked about before. So smallholder farmers in Kenya. Next, please. So before starting, I think it's worthwhile to reflect a bit on why we focus on climate change mitigation in this context. Well, we are all working together globally under the Paris Agreement to handle the threat of climate change. And we're doing this in the context of sustainable development and efforts to eradicate poverty. These are all extracts from the Paris Agreement. And we've seen here that with these biochar bioenergy systems, we are dealing also with energy security and food security aspects. Another aspect is that low greenhouse gas emission development should be accessible everywhere and for everybody. Third, finance flows should make this development possible, which means there are opportunities here for international funding from richer countries to support this kind of development. And it's not just about reducing emissions, it's also about enhancing the sinks of greenhouse gases. And there's not that many technologies, and biochar is one of the few that can also have multiple benefits in addition to carbon sinks. So next, we'll go into the example and the system that we've been studying using life cycle assessment methodology. And one important aspect there is to be clear about defining the functions of the system. And the main function here that we focus on in the first instance is cooking. So this conversion system where we produce biochar, it's also providing cooking energy for households. And these cook stoves, they reduce the emissions, and they also concentrate the flame towards the pot, and thereby it's a much more efficient energy use. But for the whole cycle, we need to see the whole system and the flows of greenhouse gases throughout. And the first part is the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere captured by trees and other plants, and that is in the biomass. In the cook stove, some of this carbon dioxide is emitted to the atmosphere. We also have other emissions, especially various short-lived greenhouse gases. But when we produce biochar and put it into the soil, not all the carbon dioxide is re-emitted, but some of it remains in the biochar, remains in the soil. And as we've heard before, we know quite well that some of that, large part of that, will stay for many decades, hundreds of years. And in that way, this system as a whole can provide climate change mitigation and potentially also net carbon dioxide removal. Next, please. To quantify this properly, we need to compare this new system with the reference system. And the reference system here is traditional current cooking practices. And that's mainly using wood fuels in an open 3-stone fire, but also some part of the cooking is made on traditional charcoal production and charcoal cook stoves. And we compare then that to using the gasifier. And for the gasifier, we have 2 different scenarios. One is that we take this biochar or the charcoal from the cook stove, use it again to cook with. And the final case is when we place it in the soil, use it in agriculture, as we have seen in these previous examples. And what we are comparing is cooking for one household for 1 year. Next, please. And here we have the results then of the climate impact of cooking for one household for 1 year. We have different colors for different assumptions regarding the fuel, and I'll explain that shortly. We see first the reference system, the charcoal system, the gasifier where the char is used for cooking, and then the gasifier biochar is when we use it in soil. And if we start by looking at the gray, that is when we assume that the fuel used is not sustainable, non-renewable. It's part of a deforestation system. And in that case, we have very high emissions because of that deforestation. But with the change to the gasifier, because we use less fuel and also other emissions are reduced, the total emissions are reduced considerably. There is not much difference here between using the char as fuel or in soil, but it's a little bit lower with the soil. If we look instead at the blue here, that's when we have a renewable system, when trees regrow, so we can see this as sustainable biomass. Then the total emissions are much lower, and we also see a considerable reduction in using the gasifier, and in the case of using it in soil, we actually get in total a negative emission here, and a much larger difference between much larger benefit of using the biochar in the soil.
Professor Sundberg, I'm afraid that we have 1 minute left.
Yeah, that's fine. Next, please. So this system that I've shown and that is published already, we didn't include the additional benefits of the biochar improving the yields in agriculture, which gives us extra food, but it also gives extra agricultural residues. These can be used again as fuels, maize cobs, for example, being used as fuels, and we use less wood. It also can affect the other emissions from the soil. All of this in total will improve the biochar system, giving it an even better relative to the original situation. And we've seen also then that to get net negative carbon dioxide removal systems, it's needed that we have sustainable biomass and a clean conversion, clean production system for producing the biochar. Thank you very much. And next slide.
Thank you very much, Professor Sundberg. Let's directly dive into a question and answer session. There is a very high-ranked question from the audience. Is there? I would like to direct it to Mr. Lango. Is there other experiences from farmers collective producing biochar on large scale as a business model?
Yeah, yes. Actually, in Tamil Nadu, southern part of Tamil Nadu in India, there are thousands of families involved in making charcoal out of Prosopis juliflora as a feedstock. There are nearly a million metric ton of charcoal is produced from here and supplied all over India for various reasons, especially restaurant and separation of ore separation, and for various reasons, even in boilers and some yes, for some other cooking purposes. So it's a large business, but there is no intervention from the government side. Still, the government has the policy against making charcoal, but it's going on. The people are doing commercial production of charcoal, but now there are farmers producers companies, farmer producer organizations. It's a kind of model developed all over India for the past 5 years. Now there is no such producer company formed, especially for biochar. Now we started the process. It's under the registration process. The problem is there is a list of commercial. There is a list of agriculture producers like dal or milk or anything that can be listed by the government and especially NABARD. The NABARD has the special scheme for this farmer producer organization, but charcoal is not in the list. That's the problem. If it is included in the list, it's easy for us to get some subsidies from the government to support the producer farmers involved in charcoal production, because they are farmers, but they the rainfall in our region is less than 500 millimeter. That's why it is covered by Prosopis juliflora. So there are chances. We are in the process of registration. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me direct the second question to Professor Sundberg. Where do you see challenges for scaling biochar applications in smallholder farming systems?
Yeah, first one is getting the cook stoves out there, finding cook stoves that are suitable in a local context and getting the production going, and having the hurdles that the farmers meet addressed so that these can function properly. Then I suppose user recommendations need to be rather local, even though in Kenya we've seen very good effects in various systems, regardless of the feedstock and for various soils and crops. So maybe that's not such a big hurdle. And getting the knowledge out also, and the understanding of the full system, so that we don't introduce further unsustainable biomass management methods.
Thank you. Another question from the audience to Mr. Dr. Robröck. To be able to produce biochar, natural resources as inputs are needed. Those resources are rare in arid and degraded regions. How can soil fertilization by biochar scale up when the process is not sustainable?
Okay, thanks for that question. And maybe if you, in the dry season, when you pass through arid regions, it looks very desolate. But as I showed in our study, although not in a dryland area, but a crop like groundnut, and if you only take the shell and leave the straw on the field for incorporation because of its higher nitrogen content, and also at the millet we studied, you get between 1 ton of biochar from millet with every harvest, and for groundnut shell you get 0.3 ton of biochar. So it might seem little, but what you saw from the results, even large crop response is received at very low rates of biochar input, less than 1 ton per hectare. And not to forget is the persistence of biochar in the soil allows for farmers to gradually accumulate more of it in a field, and also achieve and be able to dress their whole farm with biochar over time. So even at low, in scenarios of low availability, either through low production in arid regions or high competitive use, there is certainly scope for biochar soil amendment because of its long-term benefits on crop and carbon sequestration. And water, soil water retention in a dryland area as well. Very, very important.
Thank you very much. There has been another question rated high on what are the remaining research gaps to further scale out biochar. Due to the timing, I would like to have Mrs. Nyenga answer this question in written form in the Q&A section of the session here. And I would like to jump directly into some wrap-up statements, some takeaways from what we have heard so far. First, we learned that biochar systems can provide climate change mitigation with carbon dioxide removal. We heard that it requires a sustainable biomass source, and that there is a low emission technology for producing biochar while making use of energy from pyrolysis gases. For large-scale biochar implementation, sustainable feedstock sources are necessary. Second, we heard that 1 hectare of cereal legume rotation of rice paddy yields between 3.6 to 5.4 tons of residues. That translates into 0.6 to 1 ton of carbon through soil biochar amendment. We heard about gasifier cook stoves that save about 50% of fuel and produce biochar, which can be used as a co-benefit. These stoves have other co-benefits such reducing indoor pollutions, but this technology needs to fit into local practices. Then biochar application to soils significantly increases crop yields, as shown in 3 regions in Kenya. And the effect was even persistent after 20 years, over 20 seasons. We learned that small amounts of homemade biochar already result in crop yield increases. And lastly, the biochar agenda is in sub-Saharan Africa is a bioenergy agenda and should be addressed as one system, systematically. Please, I would like to address to the audience to go to the chat. You find the link in the chat. There are also links to papers, and we will upload answers to questions. Please follow the link in the chat. I'm afraid we have to close the session here. I would like to thank the presenters for their patience with a tight time schedule, and thank you very much for your inputs. And I would like to thank all participants for the questions, and please enjoy the remaining conference.
Thank you.
Yeah, please show your video if you're still here. Goodbye.
Hello, my name is Pierre Thiam. I'm a chef from Senegal, and I'm also the co-founder of Yolele. Yolele is an African food company that has for mission to open markets for underutilized crops of Africa. Our first product is called fonio. It's an ancient grain that grows in poor soil in the region called Sahel, and it has the particularity of being very, very nutritious, gluten-free, and even regenerates the soil because of its deep roots. And as a chef, I appreciate fonio because it's versatile and has quite a delicate flavor. We started distributed our brand of fonio, Yolele fonio, in the US a little over 3 years ago in one supermarket. And today, proud to say that we are distributed across the US in all the Whole Foods in America, in addition to other natural supermarkets. Close to 2,000 supermarkets are distributing our brand of fonio. We hope to be at 3,000 by the end of 2021. So this venture that we have launched with Yolele, we believe is a model of development, and we invite you to also be creative and identify crops or products from your local context, local region, and find ways to open market for them in an innovative way. In doing so, you are not only saving biodiversity, but you are also bringing economic opportunities for smallholder farmers in your region. Thank you and have an excellent conference. Fonio is a gluten-free, low glycemic, and high in amino acids ancient grain that's grown by small family farmers in West Africa. It has a delicate texture and features in many iconic African dishes. It can be a wonderful grain alternative in any of your favorite recipes. The challenge with fonio is the processing. It has tiny seeds, each covered in an inedible husk, so it's really hard to turn the crop into food. It takes about 1 hour of manual labor to barely process 1 kilo of fonio. But farmers keep on growing fonio generation after generation. Why? Because it's reliable even in the face of drought. West African farmers know that no matter what happens with the weather in any given year, even when other crops fail, the fonio harvest will come in, and it will come in early. Because fonio matures more quickly than other crops, fonio prevents starvation. It's ready to eat when the last year's harvest has been depleted. As a chef, I see an ingredient like fonio and I see opportunity. Opportunity to share my heritage with a global audience, and opportunity to help farmers like my grandparents earn a living from the sustainable small-scale agricultural practices that supports 80% of the sub-Saharan African people. Fonio is mainly considered a women's crop because its principal function on a farm is to provide sustenance for the family. These are some of the hardest working women in the world, but they are severely opportunity deprived. Turning fonio into a commercial crop provides a chance for these women to earn good money, which they can put to good use in their communities.